Julian on the brown note, and a review of The Crow, so you don't have to. Something you can thank me for doing the service in the trenches for you. The remake of the iconic 1994 film, which I think is massively overrated, but it is iconic, there's no doubt. I thought as a film it wasn't great, and I thought Brandon Lee, who famously died during the production of that film, leading them to have to finish making it without him, ironically in a similar manner to Heath Ledger in The Joker, given that Heath Ledger's Joker character to me is very heavily influenced by the Brandon Lee aesthetic of The Crow, the original Crow, based on the comic book. I thought the visuals were the stylism of the film is hugely influential, and it came on to influence everything from The Matrix to the Christopher Nolan Batman films. It was a hugely influential film. I thought Brandon Lee was a bit crap in the film, to be honest. So they've been talking about a remake of this because they're going to remake absolutely everything, and it's quite clear that they have absolutely no idea other than to remake existing intellectual property. And they have tried with about a dozen different directors and lead actors for 16 years to get this onto the table, and it really does show. And they got in a director called Rupert Sanders, whose films are Snow White and the Huntsman, Ghost in the Shell, and now The Crow. So I don't know what anyone was expecting with this, to be honest. And Bill Skarsgård, I've kind of grown to like him, as I didn't really like him as the clown in it at all. I thought he was completely the wrong take on the demonic force of the clown, playing this giggling, hiccupy, goofy clown that just didn't resonate with me like the clown did in the original books. But I really did like him in the last, I think he was in the last John Wick film, but he's got potential anyway, and obviously comes from a pretty heavyweight acting family. The one that really stuck out for me here was FKA Twigs. So I do a lot of music reviews as well in a radio show, and years ago I got that first FKA Twigs album, and I thought it was shite, and everyone in the world loved it, and everyone's worshipped everything she's done musically, and I thought it's always been derivative, boring crap. So I kind of was, I've always felt like the same with Billie Eilish a bit, which is that someone must be guiding this career for such universal consensus on, I'm fair to everything. I gave Charlie XCX a great review this year. I always expected their music careers just to be a stepping stone onto them becoming an actor. So anyway, I don't know if that's the case here, but she is the love interest here, and it's a performance for the ages. Can she ever stop pouting on film will be a question answered by science one day. I don't think she closes her mouth at all in this film. She just pouts. And I always got the impression that her music was more loved from the visual angle than from the content of it. But anyway, that's got nothing to do with how bad this film is. The opening scene is of a young The Crow watching a horse die. Now, nothing ever relates to that moment again in the whole film. And one massive sticking point is that no character in this film has any development of backstory at all. They arrive on screen, and when the film's finished, you don't know them any more than you did when they first arrived on screen. And that whole element with him and the horse has no impact on anything that happens. And it's one of the only scenes in the film that's visually shot where you can actually see what's going on, because it's so murky throughout the rest of the film. So we wind forward, and he's in a correctional facility for drug addicts. FKA Twigs' character, again for reasons that aren't really explained, seems to be hanging around with rich people. So much of this seems to relate to how I feel like her life has actually gone. And there's a moment where she ends up involved in the death of someone. And her friend says, you know, we've got evidence and blah, blah, blah. That's not much more expanded on by the end of the film, to be honest. But she goes on the run and gets arrested for having drugs. She ends up in the same drug treatment facility. And she becomes romantically involved with the Bill Skarsgård character, who's Eric the Crow. And FKA Twigs is Shelley. They're pursued for the rest of the film by Danny Houston, who's a crime lord who hundreds of years ago made a pact with the devil to send innocent souls to hell so he can live forever. Now, the opening 40 minutes of this film is probably the most punishingly, aggressively awful that I have ever sat through. My level of hate for this film at this point was off the charts. It's basically what in my head was Machine Gun Kelly, heavily tattooed, emaciated emo rapper guy, meeting a hot, aspiring wannabe model slash actress slash musician or anything else that's famous, and then falling in love and bonding over talking about each other's moon tattoos. And you can imagine how insufferable that 40 minutes is, spending time with that kind of people who I imagine have rich parents and went to private schools and have gone off the rails a bit, but imagine because they've got, you know, David Beckham's their dad or something, that they should be entitled to be famous, but it doesn't really matter at what. And they spend the time taking drugs and saying the most mind-numbingly dumb shit and very unconvincingly falling in love. And it hurt to sit through. The acting of both is terrible. Skarsgård is just a blank slate, but FKA Twigs is like her, not only her face is on BOTOX, but her emotions are as well. She just doesn't offer anything apart from the most laughably inane performance. I never bonded with their relationship at all, and it's like they, you know, they float through life where nothing can hurt them because their parents are wealthy or something. Like they leave a correctional facility and no one follows them. They just go about their lives, going to nightclubs, popping pills and drinking and lying around in bathtubs, saying the most inane things. If you were to sit next to them in a restaurant, you would probably end yourself rather than suffer another minute. And this goes on for 40 minutes of repetitive, mind-numbing crap. And when your entire movie is based around a love affair where the Crow then has to avenge the death of his girlfriend, me cheering her dying isn't setting me up for wanting the rest of the movie to happen. I was like so happy when she died. I was like, I don't have to watch FKA Twigs say one more sentence, she's dead. And that was magnificent. After that, the movie kind of calmed down a little bit. It wasn't quite as bad. It was just very murkily shot crap, but it wasn't as aggressively bad. But I'm wondering if that's because I had a respite from the FKA Twigs Machine Gun Kelly relationship that was happening, and I lied to myself. It is very dull for the next half an hour. One thing, it's got a really good soundtrack. Some as soon as Joy Division's Disorder lifted off, that Immortal track, I just thought, you haven't done anything to earn it. How dare you? And there's a great track by Gary Newman. There's a track by The Bug, who I love. Steve Martin. Is it Steve Martin? But they don't earn this music at all. And there's one scene that is in the Opera House which is straight out of John Wick, and it's a mass murder scene, and it's actually really well done. It comes out of nowhere, and it lasts for about 20 minutes in this near 2-hour film, and it's actually fantastic. And I was actually thinking about not giving it the score that I was going to give it, because I'd gone so far from that horrendous opening 40 minutes of that insufferable relationship that I'd calmed down a bit. But then the ending is, the ending sort of third is so rubbish. Like, there's 3 main characters, and you don't learn anything about any of them. Why the Danny Hutton character, what his past is. He's this villain that made a pact with the devil. That's all you find out. Someone saying that sentence. The same with the Crow guy. What was the horse at the start? What was his life since then? It's just left up to you to fill in the dots. And what was FKA Twigs doing? I mean, it kind of felt like that was what her real life was. Hanging out with these decadent rich people. Aspiring to be a musician. There's a point in the film where she sings for a tiny fraction of 3 or 4 seconds. And it's shit. And I was like, everything about this seems to be your biography of this much loved, critically acclaimed musician, and she's painted as that in this film, but there's nothing to back any of it up. And I think the final nail in a coffin that had already been buried and concreted over was the end itself. We're given a very clean reason for the Crow. So the Crow basically is, they're both killed, and he comes back to life and exists in the afterlife for a bit, where someone explains to him in some very stilted, laughable exposition that some things are so bad that you've been brought back to life to avenge FKA Twigs being killed, and he becomes invincible. And that's sort of analogous to the original film in some way. And then he goes out into the world, and he fails the first time and goes back to this purgatory region of the afterlife, and is told, you only get one more chance. If he says, I will swap my soul for hers. And they're like, okay, so you're going to go to hell instead of her, so you'll never be together again. And then the end of the film, it happens, and they just ignore that happened. He just carries on walking the earth as a sequel. And it's like, we saw it happen. We saw that pivotal point happen, and you just ignored it. It's like nothing happens to him at the end. He's just walking the earth as the Crow. And apparently Bill Skarsgård was pissed off about that as well, because he's commented online about it. And it's the one element that is really relatable to the original Crow movie, because it looks like they filmed it with stock footage. It's like they don't even have Bill Skarsgård in it anymore. So I think those elements pushed it back over the line for me. I think it's been since Madame Web. But The Crow is so aggressively bad, particularly for the opening 40 minutes. And I will never in my life experience such horror as listening to FKA Twigs and Machine Gun Kelly talk about love again. So it is a big fat 0 out of 10 for The Crow.